I'm Krista Benjamin from the Minnesota Rural Electric Association in Maple Grove, Minnesota. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
Support for this podcast comes from OutSolve, the electric cooperative's premier provider of affirmative action compliance solutions committed to keeping co-ops in compliance with federal government regulations.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. Over the past nearly 100 years, America's national electric grid has lived up to its reputation as one of the world's greatest technological marvels, capable of delivering power to millions of residents and businesses safely, affordably, and most important, reliably. But lately, that reliability has been called into question, with new government regulations forcing the disorderly closure of always-on power plants in favor of renewables, and demand exceeding supply during critical times in several regions of the country. What's causing our grid to become more fragile and less reliable? And what have co-ops been doing to raise the alarm and offer solutions? To answer those and other questions, we'll talk to NRECA CEO Jim Matheson and David Tudor, the CEO of Associated Electric Cooperative, a large generation and transmission co-op in Missouri. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Okay, so why don't we start with a sort of a baseline. What do we mean when we say that America's power grid is becoming more fragile and less reliable? What evidence can we point to show that that's not only a real problem, but it's a growing problem?
Well, we've seen this trend over the last few years where what's happening is the country is shifting to using more electricity. We're electrifying other segments of the economy. We all know about electric vehicles, but there are other examples. We're shifting in agriculture from diesel-powered irrigation pumps to electric pumps. We're seeing heat pumps instead of gas furnaces. So you've got demand going up, and at the same time, you've got supply going down. We've got what we call the disorderly retirement or premature retirement of existing generating assets, and that capacity is not being replaced. So simply stated, demand's going up, supply's going down. That calls into question the reliability of the grid. And we've seen actual examples where it's happened, as recently as last December, where on Christmas Eve, in 9 states, there were rolling blackouts in the mid-Atlantic region. There just wasn't enough generating capacity to meet the electric demands during that day. And so this is a trend that we've also seen from a third-party organization called the North American Reliability Corporation, or NERC is the acronym. And NERC is an entity that's set up just to look at the security of the grid. And for the last 5 years now, they've identified this rather disturbing trend of greater risk of outages due to not sufficient capacity to meet demand. And NERC issues a summer report and then a winter report. They do 2 reports a year listing what they think the risk is going forward. And they've seen a downward trend in the last 5 years in terms of the reliability of the grid. The most recent report was just issued in April of this year for the summer, and NERC identified 2/3 of the country as at elevated risk for potential outages just this summer. So we're not talking far in the future. We're talking 2023. So I think this is an issue that has been evolving over time. There are a lot of factors. It's not a simple issue to describe, but I do think that we're moving down a path where we should all have greater concern about reliability of the grid.
Yeah, and that's that. I mean, the point here is what got us to this point. How did we go? I mean, the American grid has been 90+% reliable over the past 5 or 6 decades. What's happened in the most recent decade that's caused this sort of downward trend in reliability?
Well, there are a few factors that I can mention. One is, as I said before, there has been increased use of electricity, not just for basic economic growth, but also because we are electrifying more and more of our economy. Secondly, we are closing a lot of power plants before their useful life for various reasons. It may be public policy, it may be economics, and we're not replacing it with comparable capacity. Either we're not replacing it at all, or we are replacing it with resources that aren't available 24/7. I like to use the term, there's certain types of power generation that are always available. It doesn't mean you run them every hour of the year, but they're available every hour of the year. And you need that as part of your portfolio of your generating capacity to make sure you can meet the needs in the moment where there's peak demand. and we're shutting down a lot of power plants that are always available. And if we're replacing with other capacity, it's often what we call intermediate capacity, which is not always available. That's primarily renewables, wind and solar. Look, wind and solar have a very valuable role to play in the overall portfolio for the electric grid. But when it comes to making sure that the generating capacity is there on a 24/7 basis to meet demand, that's where the intermediate resources fall short. But there's a couple other factors, Scott, I should mention. One is it's getting increasingly hard to build anything in this country. The ability to get permits to site facilities, whether it's a solar plant, a wind farm, a natural gas turbine generating plant, or transmission infrastructure to move the power from where it's being generated to where it's needed. It's really hard to build those things now. And that's been a trend that in the past decade has really, really come into play. Quick example, there's a transmission project in the upper Midwest called the Cardinal Hickory Project that would bring over a gigawatt of wind energy from the Dakotas over into the Wisconsin area. That transmission project, there's been efforts to get it built now since 2014, and they're still in the permitting process. So that's just one example where it's really difficult to get things built. So these trends are all coming together in a way that's really caused this challenge today where reliability is at risk.
Yeah. And I know co-ops and you specifically have been out front on this issue for a long time. What are some of so you mentioned permitting reform, that's a big thing. What are some of the other things that co-ops are advocating to not only solve this problem in the long term and take some of the pressure off the grid, but to have these sort of more long-term solutions to how to get to the transition that we're all looking for?
Well, it's a great question. And the first part is in your question. We need to look at this from a long-term perspective. The utility industry is a capital-intensive industry that makes investments for the long term. It can't flip on the moment to do something different. And so we need that long-term approach to how we're going to get to where we always have a reliable grid. That means, number one, let's stop digging deeper. It's the old saying, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. And we've got to stop making the problem worse in the moment. Permitting reform is a critical issue in terms of siting all the types of facilities I mentioned. It's not just generation, it's transmission. We need a lot more transmission lines to move electricity around this country. I can also say that we're concerned about, to the extent that natural gas is an important fuel in the moment in peak demand time for electricity to make electricity. The gas pipeline delivery system in this country is not capable of meeting the demands during peak periods. And so a discussion about reliability in the natural gas side of things is also an area that the NRECA is focused on. Particular regions of the country face much more vulnerability than others. But quick example, I mentioned an outage on Christmas Eve in the Mid-Atlantic states. Old Dominion Electric Cooperative, a generation transmission cooperative, a member of NRECA, they had a firm contract for gas. And yet on that night, on Christmas Eve, they couldn't get any gas coming to their power plant. It was a cold night. Everyone was using natural gas to heat their homes, which is important, but it's an illustration of the need for us having greater capacity to meet those peak needs. So those are some areas, Scott, that NRECA is focused on and advocating to make sure the system has the resilience and the reliability to meet those peak demands.
We've sort of touched on this, the idea that the grid and the economy is transitioning to less reliance on fossil fuels. That's sort of a given. We know that's happening. What are some of the things that co-ops have already done in that sphere? Because we have been leaders in the solar and the wind sector. Talk a little bit about what co-ops have already done and how we are helping this situation move forward.
Well, I think that electric cooperatives at the end of the day make the decisions that are best for the consumer member at the end of the line, and different renewable options have offered good advantages for some co-ops in terms of reliable, affordable power within the context of a broader portfolio. As I said earlier, renewables are intermediate resources. The sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow 24 hours a day, so it's all part of a mix. Electric cooperatives have included and grown their use of renewables as the overall amount of kilowatt hours that they're delivering to their consumers, and it is an important part of the resource mix for electric cooperatives. The key is it's a part of a mix, and I think that's really the point that we continue to emphasize with policymakers, with anyone who's making a decision or affecting decisions about how the electric grid's going to move forward. we've got to make sure we have the appropriate mix so that we can meet needs.
So one final question before I let you go, Jim. NRECA and our member co-ops have been out front on this issue for a long time, and it sort of seemed like we were a lonely voice until fairly recently. Does it look like we're finally getting through? Are we winning on this issue? And what does that look like going forward?
Well, there's no question. I think we're getting more attention on this issue, and there are a few factors that help with that. One is we've been really consistent in driving this issue. Secondly, the recent outages, like the one on Christmas Eve in the Mid-Atlantic states, have really given a specific illustration of how this is a problem. And the fact that the North America Reliability Corporation, that NERC, has consistently published reports showing that we have a deteriorating situation. All those factors are coming together to create greater attention on this issue. But there's a long way to go. It's the challenge with the electric sector is that decisions that get made take years to implement, substantial amounts of money to implement, and you can't change things overnight. And so this reliability conversation is going to continue to be necessary, in my opinion. I think one area where we're still very concerned is that it doesn't seem like there's a particular agency from the policy standpoint that's in charge of reliability. Different federal agencies have some role, but NERC is not a federal agency. It's a private sector entity. But there's the Department of Energy, there's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, there's the United States Congress. Who's in charge of reliability? That's an open question that I keep asking, because from a utility perspective, we respect reliability. We know at the end of the day it's our job to keep the lights on, but we're concerned in the policy arena that reliability doesn't have a champion. And more so, we're concerned some agencies never consider reliability when they're making decisions that are in the purview of that agency. Clear example is when the EPA is making regulations, they're not thinking about reliability. And we think of a broader conversation when we're making policy decisions where reliability is front and center has got to happen going forward if we're going to maintain the integrity of the
Yeah. Well, Jim, I've watched your press conferences. I've watched your appearances on the network news. You have been an eloquent and forceful voice on this, and I think it really has made a difference. So honestly, best of luck going forward, and thanks for coming on and talking to us.
No, happy to do it, Scott, anytime.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
We'll pause here for a word from our sponsor, and when we come back, we'll talk to another forceful co-op voice on reliability.
NRECA's Along Those Lines podcast is supported by OutSolve, the electric cooperative's premier provider of affirmative action and pay equity compliance solutions. OutSolve stands ready to prepare all required plans and reports on your behalf and partner with you to mitigate risk and ensure compliance. Visit outsolve.com/NRECA for more information.
I'm Samantha Kuhn from Paulding Putnam Electric Co-op in Paulding, Ohio. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. Associated Electric Cooperative provides power to nearly 1 million consumers in Missouri and parts of Oklahoma and Iowa, with a broad generation portfolio including coal, gas, wind, and hydro. Their CEO, David Tudor, has been one of the key co-op voices on prioritizing reliable power delivery amid the energy transition. David, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. I think we'll see how this goes.
So we talked to Jim Matheson about some of the national strategic reasons for having a more orderly energy transition. And what I want to get a sense from you is why it's important on the ground, where real people are relying on real energy. Before I get into that, though, I want to talk a little bit about Associated and your structure. I know you have this sort of three-tiered structure, which is kind of unique in the co-op program. Give us a quick overview of how that works.
Okay, well, kind of start with the member owners. We serve around 2.1 million rural cooperative members. They and groups own 51 distribution co-ops. Those 51 distribution co-ops' core competency is obviously at the distribution level. They then own 6 transmission cooperatives who own and operate most of our 10,000 miles of transmission and transformers and substations, et cetera. Associated owns a little bit of that, but the 6 transmission co-ops that own Associated operate all the transmission. We're the balancing authority, so we're kind of like an RTO ourselves, just a lot smaller. In the Associated acts as the air traffic controller, for example, over those 6 transmission cooperatives that own us. And then we operate the generation plant through the transmission co-ops to the load.
Great, and that's sort of a nice tee up for what I really want to get into here, and that's this idea of this direct connection between Associated all the way down to those members at the end of the line. Can you talk a little bit about the sense of responsibility that you at Associated feel for providing reliable and affordable power to those members?
Absolutely. I mean, basically our job, our mission, is to provide electricity to those 2.1 million consumers. But we're not alone. We're just the generation piece. Obviously, our transmission owners, our distribution systems are a part of this 3-tiered system that delivers to the consumer. In Missouri in particular, of course, we serve Missouri, Eastern Oklahoma, and Southern Iowa, but the Missouri numbers, around 57% of our members make less than $100,000 a year. So they're not rich people. There's another 30% or so that make less than $50,000 a year. So we're serving a group of people that rely on the electricity, number one, but they're also worried about it being affordable.
Right. So that's it. It really is a more of a personal connection. That there's sort of this idea that this energy transition, and there's the argument against making this transition is all about coal, but what it's really about, and I think you would agree, is the people at the end of the line who need that power to live.
I would say that our members expect us to keep the lights on, and they value reliability probably a little bit more than affordability, but not much. And of course, the minute rates go up, they care more about affordability. But in general, what we've been able to do and why our membership is so strong and so connected is because we have been reliable through 3 events. Well, more than that, but recently we were, no rolling blackouts during Uri or Elliott storms. We also had the hottest summer peaks last summer at the same time, while we had some units and planned and unplanned outages. So it's they worry about the summer just as much about the winter as they do about the winter.
Yeah, I want to get into the some of those events that you guys got through in a second, but first let's talk about the sort of relentless pressure that Associated and other utilities have been under for the past 10 or 15 years to shut down fossil fuel generation, bring on renewables. How have you at Associated managed this pressure? What have you been telling your transmission member cooperatives and their distribution member cooperatives about your justification for fighting this fight?
Well, our member communications are really strong, and we have an entire department, basically division, that focuses on member communications all the way through our 3 tiers. We coordinate that obviously through our generation transmission entities and the distribution co-op CEOs. But we have lots of different ways. Our statewide organization, our magazines, our outreach. But one of the things we do is we basically survey our membership every year, and we continually to get high scores in terms of their happiness with the electric service, and which is both reliability and affordability.
So would you say, or can you talk a little bit about the difficulties associated with maintaining coal and gas generation in the face of this pressure? Has it led to higher costs? Has it led to sort of political costs for Associated when you're lobbying for other priorities?
It absolutely, every single rule that is rewritten, either way, looser or tighter, has an effect on cost. Because it makes you adjust your entire portfolio. But in general, the last 15 or 20 years, there has been a consistent attack on coal plants, not necessarily fossil fuel plants. Only in the last couple of years has that focus moved to anything fossil, which is not just the power plant business. It's also manufacturing. It's also the oil and gas business. And so it's like climate change has, to a certain extent, become a religion. And if you have signed up to the religion of climate change, you have this very strong view of what needs to change to meet certain objectives. What that tends to ignore is that the United States can't really change the climate alone. And while we are being forced consistently through kind of 1,000 cuts to shut down our coal plants across the United States. China continues to add coal to their portfolio, as well as other countries. So if you look at the data, which is what I like to look at, what it will tell you is that the reason why we're not seeing significant decreases in carbon is because the rest of the world is increasing carbon while the United States is decreasing carbon. So the problem is, as you can see it, we're causing ourselves to be less reliable, and we're not really changing the air. It's the same air.
One of the things that you mentioned this earlier, the occurrence of Winter Storm Uri and Elliott and some of the summer storms or summer heat that you've been through. You've been pointing to that as sort of a case in point of the consequences of doing this energy transition in a disorderly way. And you've been able to sort of contrast how associated members came through those storms versus other co-ops or other utilities in the region. Can you talk about what you've been saying on that score and make some of the points that you've been making?
Sure. Well, for years, there has been a steady push, and what we've never really had, really good data to prove that we're right. So you can stand from, the top of a mountain and say, chicken little, here it comes. But if you don't have the data to prove it, then the other side will say, well, you're just a, worrywart, old dumb utility people. And, you're just, you're afraid the sky is falling. The sky's not going to fall. Everything's going to be just fine. Storm Uri and then Storm Elliott provided us with real data that shows that what works and what doesn't. So we have the data. We've shared that data with our membership. We've now shared it nationally and have been to anyone that will look at real data, versus nonsense. And what it shows you is that fossil fuel plants do perform in the summer and the winter, and if maintained right at 20 degrees below zero. But nothing works 24/7, 365 days a year. But what we did find is that the renewables, which we have a significant amount of wind in our portfolio, 1,240 megawatts of wind, and we got less than 45% in both storms from our wind resources, where on our coal and natural gas plants, we got closer to 85%. 40% swing between those two resources is the difference in reliability versus in intermittent resources.
Yeah, that's great. So give us a sense of where you see this going forward, particularly for Associated. You have talked in your testimony recently and some of your appearances that the technology simply isn't there to ensure reliability while bringing all these renewables on board. As you're looking at the horizon, do you see that breaking at some point in the next 10, 20, 30 years to where you can start to do this more orderly transition?
The answer is yes, but I need to add a couple of things. First, I think majority, if not all, the G&Ts in the country understand that there's a problem. Some are in RTOs and some aren't, and we're not. But it doesn't mean that we aren't at risk. In fact, because we have 200 interconnects with SPP and MISO RTOs and with TVA to our south, we actually, their actions can affect us over time. So our biggest fear that Associated is the actions of others, meaning forced retirements, primarily by the investor-owned utilities, causes the G&Ts that are within the RTOs, as well as the G&Ts like us that are not in an RTO, become less reliable. It's not our actions that are causing it. And we really don't have a way to protect ourselves other than say, this is crazy that we're closing things that work, that we can prove work, to replace them with something that doesn't exist. There is no technology to replace coal and natural gas plants today. So your question is when, all right? First of all, we don't know. The soonest we're going to see a small modular reactor at SMR is probably 2029, and that'll be the first one. And that's they stay on schedule. Beyond that, it's probably into 2035, maybe beyond 2035, before you're really going to see something that would replicate a coal plant and something that would replicate peaking capabilities of natural gas plants. And someone's going to say, well, batteries will do that. You can use batteries. Well, today we have 4-hour batteries. You got to recharge them to use them again. And during Uri, we had 8 straight days with no sunshine and a lot longer than 4 hours. So in order to have enough batteries to deploy across your entire portfolio, you need, I don't know what the number is, but add up 4 days and divide it into 4 hours and divide it into 8 days. We'd have to have them all over our transmission system to keep the voltage up. So I mean, it's a product that may be something that helps in the future, but today there is no battery that lasts longer than 4 hours. So you might say, well, all right, what if you have it by 2026? Okay, let's just say we do. First, what are we going to do between now and then? All right, we're at risk between now and then. Second of all, where are you going to get them? If everybody's going to add batteries across the United States, where are you going to get them? Third, where are you going to install them? All right, where are you going to put them strategically on the transmission system to replicate a peaking resource? I mean, it's just not sensible to think that can actually be done. Even if the federal government tomorrow as the federal government build 20 nuclear plants across the United States, they wouldn't get them done until 2035. So we have this gap where there's this push to shut down coal plants, and a lot of them are going to shut down in 2028. 2028 could be a really bad year between 2028 and whenever this new technology comes along. One more point here is the next suggestion is, well, let's just build a bunch of transmission. That'll solve the problem. Show me the data. Show me how that's going to solve the problem. Show me. Somebody show me how we're going to build all this transmission. And again, it takes 4 to 6 years to build transmission. Right now, transformers alone, they're backed up 4-year queue. So trying to get GSUs for power plants, trying to get transformers for transmission, poles, wires, conduit, all these things in the supply chain mix with everyone in the country trying to do it at the same time. And got to buy America, right? Can't use anything from China. It's just silly. It can't be done. It cannot be done.
Yeah, no. I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is this is something that the trend is going in a certain direction, and that's the way it's going to go. It just needs to be more time. We need more time. We need more technology.
More transmission, more new technology, and a lot more time. And so I got, Jim Robb, the CEO of NRECA, got asked last week by the senator, by basically the Senate committee, and a specific senator, I think it was Senator Keene, said, how long do you need? And he was hesitant. He said, he doesn't know. I mean, he's running the transmission system. So I waited till a point later in the day and answered the question that we need at least till 2040. Frankly, I thought when they came out with 2050 several years ago that was aggressive. Starting to see some technology coming through that might be deployable, installed, implemented, creating megawatts. But I think it's going to take till 2040 for us to really have something that can replace these coal plants in a orderly fashion and where we don't lose control of the grid. And one last thing is that a lot of times we don't talk about black start capabilities, but if you lose the grid, you've got to have units out there where you can black start the system to get it back up and rolling. If we don't have any fossil fuel plants, what are we going to use for black start units to regenerate? But so these are the kind of things when you're not at the operating level, it's easy to say, well, there's a shiny red ball over there in the corner. It's called renewables. And that's new investment. It's new money. Isn't it pretty? Aren't they gorgeous? Those windmills and those solar panels, so much better than that ugly coal plant out there. So let's put a whole bunch of money in those renewables and let's shut down these ugly old plants. They're like Model Ts. Let's go to the new Tesla. Sounds great. Show me how it's going to work. You show me how it's going to work, we're all in. We'll be happy to modify our portfolio over a reasonable period of time if you could show me something that works and is affordable.
Yeah, and that's the ultimate thing. I think we're all fairly agnostic about what we generate power with, as long as it works, as long as it's safe, reliable, and affordable.
And honestly, I hope technology comes out of nowhere. I think that would be wonderful. But it's not going to stop these other countries from building coal plants. You know why? They're inexpensive, they're dispatchable, they're baseload, they're using resources that they can mine. They work. So it's going to be difficult to get the rest of the world to get rid of something they're just now building.
Yeah. Well, David, it's a tough issue. Co-ops have been out front early on raising the alarm. No one has been more forceful about it than you. So I appreciate you coming on and explaining it to us and sort of getting us up to speed.
Well, I would tell you that we appreciate what NRECA is doing, and specifically what Jim's been saying out there. And I know we're not the only ones. I think you would find all the G&T CEOs are thrilled that NRECA has stepped into this role and is making it more and more clear every day to those that matter, to Congress, that a problem is coming and lives are at risk.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and to our sponsor, Outsolve. For more on this and other podcasts, visit us at electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm Leah Hoover from Oregon Trail Electric Cooperative in Baker City, Oregon. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.